Now, we all may want to identify as someone that doesn't, feel the pull of social media, feel the pull of getting more likes on YouTube, getting more listeners to our podcast, more people on our site, more hearts, stars, thumbs up, whatever it is in your platform. But the fact is that almost all of us succumb to it in some fashion. I'm not on Facebook, but I had to delete this way to check my stats package easily from my iPad so that I didn't concentrate on views. Now, this brings up three problems for people who really want to be effective in their work, in their life, in whatever. First off is that it can be really hard to identify the things that are holding us back because we just don't see it. We don't have that 30,000 foot view into our own life. Second problem is if we have the opportunity to identify this, if we really do get that 30,000 foot view, because our environments around us are designed by, not even by us sometimes, but by other people, because they've kind of slid into this channel of distraction, it can be really hard to work out of it because it's just what you know, right? If you know abuse, it can be really hard to see that there's something outside of it. And this happens even with, something not nearly as weighty as abuse, but like with your social media interaction, with your, checking Facebook, checking Instagram, scrolling through that stupid browse tab, that like, or for you tab, like that kills me every time. What I need to do is delete Instagram. That's really what I need to do. And the third thing with the draw to social media is that we end up comparing ourselves to these like highly curated lives that other people have, right? These lives that are like so perfect that we just don't even know what to do about. As we're going to talk about today through the light of digital minimalism. Before we go into the intro, I'm going to give you a quote from the book though. The constant exposure to their friends' carefully curated portrayals of their lives generates feelings of inadequacy, especially during periods when they're already feeling low. And for teenagers, it provides a cruelly effective way to be publicly excluded. On that note, cue the intro. We'll be back to talk about Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. Now, just before we jumped into the intro, we talked about people really comparing their curated lives to other people, and that's not good. It's not good for us. And we see this, I'm on the board of a local college, and we see this in our consistently rising rates of, not needy, but say like something's a 1 to 10 on a scale of mental health needs. We're seeing about the same amount of 9s and 10s, like real serious things, but like the low grade anxiety stuff that's 5 and under, like it's just consistent. It hasn't stopped, and it's not stopping. It's continually overwhelming us. Here's some stats out of the book. Right, rates of depression increased. This is in college students from 24.8% in 2009 to 29.9% in 2017. Students diagnosed with mental health conditions increased from 21.9% in 2007 to 35.5% in 2017. Personal stigma about getting mental health support declined. This is a good one, from 8.2% to 5.1% during the study. Now, the only decent stat in this whole study, and this is linked in the description, linked in the show notes, is that people are seeing less stigma with seeing mental health. My friend Corey Miller has talked about this a bunch. He's been on a bunch of like big publications talking about mental health and the stigma we have against it, and that it's just not a good thing, that we can move past this and that we don't need this. That's the only good stat. Now, Newport draws the conclusion, or not conclusion, he suggests that the reason we're seeing a lot of this increase is that we're really getting into the first generations getting into college that grew up with this device that I'm using for notes, right? That's my smartphone right here that I'm using for notes as I dig through my Scrivener file and try to not sound like I'm reading from a script. But as people come in and they like feel this pull of connection all the time, they're missing something else. And this is what we get to later in the book, this deeper social interaction, this high bandwidth. So Newport calls your device, your social media, low bandwidth, right? It's a signal. It's a thumbs up or nothing. That's it. And you don't get the nuance that, even watching me, if you're watching the video of this or if you're listening to the podcast, you can hear my voice. You can hear my emotion in it. That is high bandwidth. You can see my gestures. You can see my eyes. You can hear my voice going up and down. That's high bandwidth. And text is just not high bandwidth. That's it. It's way too easy, right? One of my rules for life is you do not fight on the internet. So you do not fight via text. You just don't fight on the internet because it's not worth it. I will have a difficult and hard conversation with someone I know well in real life, but I will not have that type of conversation with just random internet people because it's a waste of my time. It's just not going to work out well. Now, digital minimalism is broken up into two main parts. The first part is his 30-day detox, and that's, what it says. It talks about eliminating your social media use down to the essentials. Your digital use down to the essentials. And part two is about, he doesn't want to call it screen hacks. He doesn't like that word, but it's about creating a new relationship with your technology. And And the reason you have a 30-day detox is that you can divorce yourself from that relationship and then come into it without a lot of the preconceived notions that you would have from just using technology all the time, because it's the way of life. So it lets you reset that relationship. Now, in this, I think there are some core concepts that you need to understand from Newport's old books, specifically deep work. And so let's start with the deep work hypothesis out of Deep Work by Cal Newport. I'll quote it, and it says, "The deep work hypothesis: the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare. At exactly the same time, it is becoming increasingly valuable in our economy. As a consequence, the few who cultivate this skill and then make it the core of their working life will thrive." From Deep Work. So in that book, he argues that if you want deep work, you need to clear distraction. You need to have nothing, right? So I have my phone here, but it's actually muted. My wife would text me and nothing will happen. Messages doesn't even send notifications. My iPad behind me, no notifications. My Mac over on the shelf there, no notifications. I don't have them. I am sitting in a semi-quiet office right now because no one's around and there's no one to distract me. I can focus on this recording. That's one of the tenets of deep work. Now, one of the other big ideas in there is the any benefit approach. He calls it to networking tools because this was really focused on Slack, though Slack wasn't even around then, but networking tools, how you communicate with others. I think this applies to anything. So I usually just call it the any benefit principle, but here it is. You're justified in using a network tool if you can identify any possible benefit to its use or anything you might possibly miss out on if you don't use it. Like I said, I apply this to much more than just networking tools. I apply this to everything, right? Is there some benefit to getting a 4K camera? Sure there is, but like it's the biggest benefit I have to getting a new camera is autofocus because this doesn't have it. All the rest of it, it's not going to make or break my channel, my videos, my audio, nothing like that, right? Getting this relatively inexpensive mic was some benefit, but again, it's diminishing increases as I go higher. And this goes with everything. Just because there is some benefit to a networking event, to doing anything, does not mean that we have to do it to capture every little benefit of that. There are things that we can leave behind. And then the final core point in this, which we revisit in a few books I've read lately, but it's the craftsman principle, or the craftsman approach to tool selection, in which we identify the core factors that determine success and happiness in your professional and personal life. Adopt a tool only if its positive impacts on these factors substantially outweigh its negative impacts. So something he cited in Digital Minimalism was Amish hackers, and this is out of Kevin Kelly, What Technology Wants. There's a chapter in that. I read that as well. Decent book. But What Technology Wants, they talk about Amish hackers, and there's basically an alpha Amish nerd, and the alpha nerd says, hey, I want to try a cell phone. And then the whole community checks it out and says, yeah, this is good, but it's good for business purposes, so it must stay in your car. It doesn't come into the house with you. It's not just a thing you use all the time. So they look at the benefits and the detriments to what their community values, and they allow technology or sometimes disallow technology based on what the community decides. Now, Newport does acknowledge in this that these decisions are often made by, I forget what they have a special word, but by a bunch of dudes, and there's not really many women in this. And so there's things to work on in the Amish community like that. But their approach to technology is, it doesn't just look at a benefit. It's a, how does this go with our whole view on everything? Does this fit in? Does this do, is this a good thing, right? They don't allow cars necessarily because it gets people out of the community instead of working within their community. Sometimes they will have a car in a community for taking all the men to work at the factory or something like that, right? They may have a CNC machine in the background because it helps, produce wagon wheels or something, but then they won't have electricity in the house because they look at how everything benefits just holistically in their community, and does it benefit or doesn't it, and what should we be doing with it? Now let's jump into part 1 of the book. And it really starts with examining that there are lots of engineers, lots of really smart people, programmers, some of my peers, because I come from a coding background, that are out there, and what they're doing is they are helping design apps that are not in our best interest sometimes, apps that are designed to pull our attention on a regular basis. And here's a quote from the Globe and Mail, to go with that. It says, Matt Mayberry, who works at California startup Dopamine Labs, says it's common knowledge in the industry that Instagram exploits this craving by strategically withholding likes from certain users. If the photo sharing app decides you need to use the service more often, it'll show only a fraction of the likes you've received on a given post at first, hoping you'll be disappointed with your haul and check back again in a minute or two. Now, Instagram goes on to say, we don't do this, but we do try to strike a balance between overwhelming you with likes and notifications and not. So they say they trickle them out, not to bring you back, but just so you don't get overwhelmed. I have a hard time believing that. I just do. I think that, especially, sitting here in 2019, we've seen a lot of the tech companies don't have our best interests at heart in any fashion. And that while they may say, oh, we're doing this for a good reason, they're not really. They're just, that sounds nice in the media. That's it. So we'll see. That's what I feel. And I agree with Newport in this. I think that most tech companies, I think a lot of the individual engineers are wonderful people, but I think especially with Facebook right now, working at Facebook and continuing to say, hey, we're doing good it gets a harder and harder sell all the time. There are two big things that really help addict us to technology, and that's one is the intermittent approval, which is withholding like setting them sometimes, and the other is really our desire to be socially connected and to feel socially connected. Like I already said, though, a lot of online connection, a lot of online connection is low bandwidth. It's not like there's more bandwidth in this right here than in the comments below or in any comments anywhere on Twitter. Like there's lower bandwidth there than there is seeing someone's face. So, and yet we prize these things. And in some ways it's good, right? There are networks that couldn't connect, really esoteric interests that people just couldn't connect on if they didn't have the internet to open them up to the wider sphere. That's a good thing. But we also need to remember that empathy is hard to learn. It takes time. And the only way we learn empathy is by basically being mean as kids, being mean as teenagers, and seeing the pain on someone else's face, and then feeling it ourselves. So if we're not getting that opportunity, then we're not building empathy. Now, digital minimalism, according to Newport, is a philosophy. Let's read a quote from him. A philosophy of technology use in which you focus your online time on a small number of carefully selected and optimized activities that strongly support things you value, and then happily miss out on everything else. There's three principles in here that Newport says we need to follow, we need to ascribe to that really are the core of digital minimalism. And one is that clutter is costly. Too many things around, too many devices, too many notifications just cost us far more than we realize. Number two is optimization is important, that we don't just use something. So there might be some utility in Instagram, but we don't just use it blindly. We use it like a professional, really looking to extract every minute part of utility in there. And then intentionality is satisfying, that it is fun, it is good for us, and we feel good inside. It's good for our lives if we're intentional about how we use things. Newport's digital declutter has a few steps. Step one is define your technology rules. So you may say that, well, I can't use Facebook because it's not really work related, and all my family's local, so I don't need to connect with them. I don't connect with anyone on Messenger, so I'm all good. I don't need to use it. And that might be one of your rules. Now for my wife, for her work, she has her boss who works remote, who works somewhere else. Facebook Messenger is the only thing that's allowed on her corporate network. So that's all she can use. And my wife has to get Facebook messages for work. And she would say her rule might be, I'm allowed to use Facebook messages for work, but I'm not allowed to use Facebook in any other way. Totally fine. That might be one of your rules. And you decide these rules up front. And you got to think hard about them, because it's very easy to confuse yourself between what is really needed and what's not, right? If you say, oh, well, I talk to my mom sometimes on Facebook Messenger. Okay, but you got a phone. Like, why don't you call your mom instead? That might not be needed. And each of us has to decide that for ourselves and decide and be truthful with ourselves, be hard with ourselves around the technology that we can use during our 30-day digital declutter. Step two is that 30-day break, where you apply your rules of technology rigorously and that you just stick with them and you only do those things that you have to do with your technology. Everything else off to the side, you stay away from it, you don't worry about it. And step three of the digital declutter is reintroducing technology with your new relationship and applying the any benefit principle, right? So you don't just look at something and says this has some benefit, you cut it and you really figure out what has the maximum utility for you. And then, as he says later, you use it like a professional. So you use everything like a professional. So a professional social media manager doesn't go into their client's account and just scroll randomly. They go in with a search looking for specifics. They help support topics. They go in and they, update, they reply to things, and then they out. That's it. They don't just randomly scroll. They look for the interaction that they want. That's kind of where the end of the book will go, where he talks about, he has a bunch of practices, which we're going to get to, but how you can use your technology. Now, part two, are practices that we need. Now, Newport's first point is that solitude wins. And let's look at the quote here from him. It says, solitude requires you to move past reacting to information created by other people and focus instead on your own thoughts and experiences wherever you happen to be. This is mindfulness. This is you being aware of what's going on around you, not just sticking your headphones in and taking off, right? It's talking to people on the street, getting to meet new people. That's what it really is about. It's about solitude, being not just alone, but being alone and being in the world around you, right? That's what it really means in this context. So he has a couple practices in this. First is leave your phone at home, or at worst, bury it in a bag. It's like the lowest, the worst option is taking it with you, but burying it in the bottom of your bag. And the second practice really is writing letters to ourselves. So communicating with ourselves by hand. Yeah, he means by hand. Just about where we are, what we feel, where we want to be, and that we can come back to this later. The second main point in the part two is is not deep social interaction. I've talked about this a bunch, so I'm not going to dig into it. They talked about it really good in Mike did. I forgot the name of the podcast. There'll be a link, or I'll put a little title here because I'll look it up after. About he said he's never going to like again. Bookworm. That's a Bookworm podcast. They just did Digital Minimalism recently, and so they talked about never clicking like again because that is not meaningful social interaction. If you really like something, call them, send them an email, have a more meaningful social interaction with them instead of just clicking the like, because that's an easy way. Just, oh, I clicked like, they're my friend. If you're worried about, this Newport says this, if you're worried about what your friend is going to think because you didn't click like, call them. If they have a new baby, don't say, oh, I love your baby. Go visit them. Like, make it a meaningful interaction every time, and don't just take the easy way out. Newport's first recommendation is don't click like. His second one is consolidating the time we text. And he says in here, so if you're going to text, totally cool, go for it. But use it as a way to organize face-to-face meetings. So text about coffee to have coffee with someone. I did this with my friend Sherman. Hi, Sherman. I know you watched some of these. Last week, we were emailing and texting to have coffee last Friday. We both showed up early, and we actually co-worked for a bit. And then at 4 o'clock, we shut our laptops and had our coffee really. And we talked in the middle of this too. And we've had deep, meaningful social interactions by using email, using text to really get to know each other, to get to arrange times to go for walks on the river and other stuff like that. So we get to know each other better. Now, Newport cautions here that something we're going to get annoyed if you're not texting, and just say that to them. Just don't worry about it. If it's not worth their time to call you instead of just texting all the time, then you're not worth their time. That's what they're saying. You're not worth their time. So you're going to narrow your social field, but at the same time, you're going to focus on the high bandwidth activities. And that's the real meat, the real things that you're going to look back and remember. Like, do you remember the text message you sent with your friend? Or do you remember the board game night? You remember the face-to-face interaction? Newport's third idea in here about not picking like is holding office hours. I don't know what else to call it, but it's the idea you go down to the pub every night on 5 on Friday and you hang out and you talk with the regulars. Or I spend a lot of Friday afternoons I spent at the coffee shop, and I got to know the guy beside me, Albert, and I found out, I actually camped with the son a few years back. His son and his son's kids were camping. Well, I had my daughter out and we were winter camping, and we got to know each other, right? He was recommended books that I'm enjoying now. So having regular office hours where you go and your friends, hey, Curtis is at the coffee shop every Friday at 5. I'm going to go have coffee with them. And you might bring a book, but the real purpose is to talk to people, not to read that book. Newport's third big point is leisure time. And I titled it, Oh, Leisure, Where Art Thou? Let's start with this quote. A life well lived requires activities that serve no other purpose than the satisfaction of the activity yourself. I do coaching people, and a lot of the recurring things we find is that as people find more productivity and have more time in their lives, that they just try to jam it with more work. That's not really the purpose. Some of the nice thing about my wife working at 3 o'clock every day is that I can't jam it with work. I got kids to take care of, and my 8, 5, and 2-year-old want my time. And while they come in here and they dance around sometimes, that's great. They want my time, and they need my time. So I need to do it. Yeah. So instead of really taking all this productivity time, all this extra time that you gain because you're not on social media, use it for leisure. Use it for reading some book. Use it for something you're never going to try and monetize, right? Build some shelves at your house. Do something for that. He actually says that's one of his recommendations, build or fix something every week. One of his recommendations is to do something with your hands every week. Now, I talk to people who say, oh, I'm not handy. And I really think it wasn't that long ago, maybe 100 years. I remember my dad even. So my dad is 65 now. I remember him when he was in his 40s, so about my age. Everybody on the street, when something had to get fixed, neighbors would show up and we'd all fix something, right? I remember I was a kid. I was just running around in the park, but built fences together, helped out on cars. Everyone on the street did this. And my dad worked for a tech company. He made $250,000 a year in, the 90s. So good money. And there was all different kinds on the streets I lived on, but it was all lots of helping each other out, lots of fixing. So not being handy, well, of course you're not handy to start, because you got to practice, right? Maybe you start by learning how to stain a shelf properly, and then you learn something else, right? So maybe your first shelf is you buy some brackets from IKEA and a pine board, and you stain the pine board. That's what I got one over here. And you stain the pine board, and then maybe you build a bookshelf. I built a bookshelf, it's upstairs, right? And you just graduate yourself up. That's one of the ideas. So another one is, let's say, learning guitar. And in learning guitar, maybe you say, I'm going to learn how to play this whole album this quarter. And you start by the basics and you keep building up and building up until you really can play this whole album within the quarter. That's his other recommendation, is finding things that you can do that are leisure, that have nothing to do with your day job, that are not monetizable. Now, he also says in here, what about learning hard programming languages? Because that is in many ways leisure. I know that's how I learned. I learned it on my leisure time. Now, he would say, don't do this because it's a screen, and that the goal is to stay away from screens. So, well, sure, it's leisure, but it's screen time. So get away from the screen. And Newport's final big point in the book is that we need to be critical with our attention, that we need to be choosy about where we're going to spend our attention and just not worry about the things that don't matter. He has three big things here. One is delete social media from your phone. Two is turn your devices into single purpose computers. I actually wrote about this, about turning my phone into just a phone, basically, turning my iPad into writing machine, and then my Mac has some other stuff on it. But like being intentional about how I did this, and I'll link to those in the show notes so that you can figure out or see how I went about this, like making my devices purposeful. Like it's like 18 months ago, before digital minimalism was out. So Newport must have stolen my idea. Not really. So here's what he says on that topic, though. As many have discovered, the rapid switching between different applications tends to make human interaction with the computer less productive in terms of quality and quantity of what is produced. Actually, one of the reasons I choose to work on iOS is because that on the Mac, it's so easy to have like a whole bunch of windows open. I don't even have a monitor. I use my iPad as a monitor. See my review of LumaFusion and stuff for the Suite setup, which I'll link to. Suite setup and Air Display 3. So I use my iPad as my screen for my Mac right now, at least at this juncture. I might change that in a few weeks, but the thing with the Mac is that it's so easy to have so many applications open, especially with large screen real estate, right? A 24-inch monitor and a 21-inch monitor. It was easy to just have so much open and have so many distractions available for me that it would be hard to work, right? At one point I had the 24-inch, 21, and a 13-inch laptop. And that was just a lot of screen real estate. And there are times when I'm like, oh, I miss it, but I get so much more done by just focusing on the single task at hand on my iPad Pro that it's excellent. I'm sure there are limitations in iOS software, but a lot of these limitations increase a little bit of friction with what you're doing, thus make it easier to stay focused on what you should be doing. So one of the final practices that Newport says in the book is to break the pull of fast social media, fast media. So you're not looking for hot takes, you're looking for slow media. You're looking for a person like Dave Pell of Next Draft, who does a good roundup of the news. Jocelyn K. Glye, who every 2 weeks has a good newsletter around creativity, productivity, and focus. That's what you focus on. You focus on those things instead of the hot takes, instead of anything else like that. You focus on that stuff, and maybe you peruse the newspaper, another good one, because it's instantly not a hot take because it had to get printed. But looking at the newspaper, at the sections you care about, the sections you need, instead of just watching for hot takes on Twitter, on Facebook, or anything. And you avoid all hot takes. That's it. Just avoid them. Don't do them. Don't do hot takes. They're bad. They just get you amped up and they pull you into distraction. Don't do it. Look at the newspaper. Look at same newsletters, good curators. That's it. Don't do the hot takes. Hot takes are bad. Last question. Should I read Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport? Let's start with the quote, though. We eagerly signed up for what Silicon Valley was selling, but soon realized that in doing so, we were accidentally degrading our humanity. That's really where Newport comes from, is that we bought into technology. I was actually just reading Irresistible as well, and one of the points in that book was that much as cocaine was like, oh, it's perfect, like it helps break the addiction of morphine. We know now that that's ridiculous, but great minds like Sigmund Freud was like, I'll take cocaine instead of morphine because I feel better after and I don't have the withdrawal symptoms. That's just because you have a new drug. That's what it is. You have a new drug. And that in some ways, maybe we're sitting there with our digital technology that we don't know the effect it's going to have on our brain, right? We're seeing some of this effect maybe as we get into college now, as we see people getting into college, but we don't really know yet where everything's at. And we need to be careful about this. Digital Minimalism. Should you read it? I'm going to say, yeah, you should read it. It's a good book. I really enjoyed it. I maybe ranked Deep Work a little higher, but I think I was further away from where Deep Work was when I read it. Whereas Digital Minimalism, I'm like right on. I was like, oh yeah, I do a lot of this stuff already. And it, for me, it affirmed a lot of the stuff I do. Gave me a few new ideas how to tackle it maybe. But it was a good book, good read, well written, lots of research. I like research, like citations. We'll talk about a book coming up by a PhD with just says, science says. Anyway, bad book, at least partially on that. So Digital Minimalism is a good book. I recommend it. I think you should read it. If you are struggling with your technology, with how it interacts with your life and feeling distracted all the time, follow it and do the 30-day detox and be strict about it. Don't do it half-assed. Just do it and stick with it. It's a good book. It can help you really transform how productive you're going to be and get into stuff that's just outside of being digital all the time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's video, you can make sure you don't miss any by subscribing below. Make sure you hit that little bell icon so you get notifications if you like notifications. Although I gotta be honest, I hate them. If you'd like to support the channel, like to make sure that the videos keep coming, that the content keeps coming, you can support me on patreon.com/Curtis McHale. Have an awesome day.